Hey, it's Shango from the Shaping Fire podcast. You know, a few weeks ago I was at the Washington Cannabis Summit, and Kevin Jodrey was there, up from Wonderland Nursery in Humboldt County where he lives, and he was on the Cannabis as Agriculture panel, and it was a fantastic panel. Actually, the whole panel was great. But you know, I'm a big fan of Kevin Jodrey, and so I pulled out all the bits with Kevin talking and edited them all together, and I'm posting it here for you today. And so, you know, you can kind of consider it a whole bunch of Kevin Jodrey gems. He talks a little bit about terpenes, of course. He talks a bit about strain choice, a little bit about russet mites, and, you know, a little bit of this and that. But this is all solid gold. So thanks to the Cannabis Alliance for letting me record, and thanks for Kevin for coming up and sharing his insights with us. Here you go.
My name is Kevin Jodrey. Thank you very much for showing up today and allowing me to speak in front of you. It's always a pleasure to come to Washington. You're an exceptional audience to get to work with. My background in cannabis is pretty extensive in terms of, in a lot of ways. But I've been involved in cannabis for about 41 years. And I always, even as a child, believed we would end up here. I knew at some point that cannabis would become accepted in a different view. And I approached it from that point of view. And so I tried to understand as much as I could about what I was doing so that I would have a future. I believed at some point I would end up here, and I knew that I would have to be able to have a skill set to survive, so to speak. And a lot of my study in cannabis and work in cannabis was trying just to understand primarily how does one get cannabis to the table, which means how do we get it to the market. And that's really the most important thing to me, because that dictates everything backwards. And then when you put ethics with it, you actually have a pretty sustainable situation. So we combine how do we get product to the table and how do we do it in an ethical manner. And I think that what you have with cannabis is it was held in check for so long that what we did was we created an entire, a library of genetics that were improperly sourced. What we did all these years is we chose cannabis for stealth, so we took away a lot of desirability and smell, and we used all these illegal pesticides and fungicides and PGRs, plant growth regulators, to assist us. And what happened over all these years, decades, is that we created a gene pool that's weak. We chose varieties that were trendy, and we bred them too heavily, and we bottlenecked them. And so what you have is you have this incredible population of cannabis varieties that we use that are inherently prone to all these different pathogenic problems, pest problems, inherently weak in certain circumstances, exceptionally hungry for exceptionally high nutrient loads, because everyone always gave their plants the most fertile soil, the best situation. And when you select in that situation, what you select is plants that thrive in perfection. I call it living in a vacuum. What I want to see is a plant that really got mistreated in a horrible situation that didn't get fed. That's the plant that I really want to see, because that's the one that we actually work with. And so I'm known in cannabis as a nursery operator, but I have a farm, and so I'm kind of vertical. So I have a lot of stuff going on, but I'm known primarily for nursery work. And in California, I basically created the modern nursery model in terms of walk-in store nursery front. It was never done prior to that. And I created the nursery model from dispensaries, where the dispensary itself created the stock. So for the last 10 years, I've been applying what I learned in the 30 years prior. And for all of that, what we found was that most cultivators are basically praying for success. And they're unfortunately praying in the wrong direction. Because what they do is they choose products that are trendy, with no consideration for where they're going to cultivate it, and with no consideration for the cultivation methodologies or the operators, and no diversity. And what happens is that we'll use OG Kush as an example, just because it's just such a hot mover where we live in California. So everyone wants to grow OG, but OG's a massive family, and so depending on what cultivar of OG you get, you might get one that's exceptionally powdery mildew prone, exceptionally botrytis prone. Now we have russet and broad mites that are everywhere. Prone for those also. Epidural layers are thick enough, doesn't resist. And so people use these inferior cultivars, and they wonder why they're getting a living crap kicked out of them the entire time they cultivate. And so what we tried to do through the normal nursery model was do population sifts. So what I do is I go through large populations of plants, and we find the outliers. We find plants that have an ability to resist naturally. And this is a normal agricultural practice. I'm lucky in that I get to tour all kinds of neat facilities. I get to see some really interesting stuff. But I got to go and do a tour of the largest redwood nursery propagation facility in the world. So Green Diamond is the world's largest redwood producer. They're also the largest redwood nursery. I got to talk to their lead grower who's been cultivating there for 48 years. He's involved in a breeding project that will take 150 years, and so he only carries the first third of it forward. But he took me out into his mother library, so to speak, which was acres and acres of forest. And it was from every 1,000 acres of redwoods, the biologists selected one as the greatest of that 1,000 acres, and they brought that and held it. And so I got to tour an entire forest with nothing but trees, but that had been selected from 1,000-acre lots. And one of these trees was number 48. And it was, I think, 180% greater growth than any other redwood ever recorded. But they were intelligent enough to not monocrop it. They did not monocrop that cultivar. What they did is they put it so many miles from the other plants they worked with so that these patches, these 40, 50-acre forests of that specific, were laid out so that they had a diversity. So even though it's within the same family, the cultivars have been separated. And for redwood, it takes about 130, 140 years to do seed propagation. And so, as what his phrase was, it takes 150 years before she gets sexy. and I laughed because I saw something that made me understand that what we're doing now is we're the beginning of this. We're the foundation of this. California is only legal for 4 days. And we'll see how long that lasts. We're the foundation of this modern cannabis world in terms of how do we approach cultivar selection, how do we approach IPM. Most people have no clue what that means. It's a label off a pair of pants, maybe. Because really, most cultivators in cannabis have never been in mainstream. The majority of people, Washington got a head start. You guys have been legal for a while now, so it's been very eye-opening to come here for the years that I have, because you get to see integration at a level that we don't have in California. In California, we have a much looser situation where I get to work with a tremendous number of professors from universities, scientists from private organizations, because they can't touch cannabis. They can't have it in their hands, so to speak. They can't have it at the school, they can't have it at the facilities. And so they find guys like me that are willing to play detective. And we chase problems, and we look through cultivars to see what resist. And they come in and analyze and say, this one is virally infected, this one is not. Let's see what happens when we grow them. And so what you start happening is you start having this intersection between the science component and the actual ag component, because the two of them are in radically different worlds. And to me, science it's an understanding, but it's a vacuum. You have to hold all variables constant in order to solve for X. You can't do that as a farmer. And I have a farm too, and I've been farming for a really long time, and on an organic level. And so it's an attempt to try to understand, how does one, as a farmer, take the information from normal agricultural practices that are, I say, organically based, biologically driven, and then apply it to what we do and actually have some success. And you're seeing ketchup mostly. I don't like ketchup, I like mustard. And so ketchup is where you have a problem and then you try to figure out how to solve it. And what we have to be able to understand with some of the stuff going on is how to be more proactive in our approach. And like I said prior, for me, I like to work off populations. What I find is that if I want to get a good friend, you might find him in group of 2. You might find it a little better if it's group of 200. You might find a really decent person in group of 2,000. You get up to 20,000, you're going to find something exceptional. And that's how I see cannabis cultivar selection too, is the population. And it's been very difficult. For us, we've been running these black market operations for years. So these incredible populations that I've been working with are highly illegal. Now they're not. And I've been legally as a farm operator for years. But all the R&D, all the work, all the prior stuff, that was all through the desire from people who really were into cannabis, where you were really about it. You were willing to take the risk to hunt the product that was going to work for you, for whatever your needs were. And if that was economic needs, those are fine. And if it was for medicinal needs, then perfect. And if it's for personal use, that's great. But It requires you to be able to have enough of an ability to understand what is it you're seeking and how do you ascertain that. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to take these cultivars from these big populations, and then I use Motley's technology to map them. And what it does, it allows people now to be able to find that cultivar that we know is exceptionally pathogenically resistant. Cultivars that we have that are exceptionally prone to problems, I call them, even if they're desirable, because if they're too risky for cultivators to take a gamble on. And so what happens is you end up having to neck down the populations you work with. You have to find specific cultivars. The market's trendy, but when you chase those trends, you'll chase yourself right into some bankruptcy. And what we try to recommend to individuals is a diversity in terms of what would be diverse in terms of resistance, so that we have the greatest chance of survival of a portion of the crop. And then we work on diversity in terms of market velocity, how fast those products move through the system. So you have things that are trendy that move very quickly, but they're in smaller markets, and things that are very stable in movement, larger markets, but lower price points. And so you're trying to get this weird intersection of what is the plant that you're trying to work with, and how do you get it to function for you in the way that you need. The concept about monoculture is an important one, and we just had this discussion this morning about the banana. And so the banana, I think in the 50s or 60s there was a song, there'd be no more bananas. Well, that's because there was no more bananas. They had a fusarium outbreak that wiped out all the bananas. And so they find another banana called, I think it's called the Cavendish cultivar. So they find the Cavendish cultivar in another country, and they introduce it, and lo and behold, it works great, and it's resistant to fusarium, and everybody's happy. But why did that cultivar really succeed? It wasn't even for the resistance as much as you thought. It was because it didn't have to be refrigerated when you moved it. It could handle 45 to 55 degrees on movement. So it changed the economic consideration of that cultivar dramatically. It made it to where they could cheapen the price of shipping it. So not only was it resistant, but it was cheaper to move. And then just within the last year, there's another form of fusarium that is attacking the Cavendish cultivar. And so now we're about to see another one of these banana epidemics, lack of banana. And that's what I see within cannabis. We see certain populations that are exceptionally prone. We noticed when fusarium came in. We noticed when, well, PM's been here for a long time. We go back probably 15, 18 years. And I remember when it first came in, and I think we traced it back into Oregon rose, where the rose grows. And you can kind of see where things move forward. But then the broad mite that came in, the russet mite that followed, these issues are relatively new, and the speed at which they move is incredible. And so it's the same situation where the only way you're going to find out resistance on these is if you have it. And so people try to keep everything as protected as possible all the time in the production end of it, but really there's very little R&D done in cannabis where you're actually exposing these plants to these issues, and you're testing. There's, for me, I can do it because I own a nursery. And so my nursery is a little different than most nurseries because of one of my locations in Humboldt County. And in English, that means that I supply to people who produce tonnage for a long time. And so we might estimate that the work that the nursery creates might come out anywhere between $150 to $200 million a year in product grown from the cutting. So over the last 4 years, I might be involved in $800 million in cannabis on the table. So I look at it differently. I didn't create $800 million myself, but my nursery stock created approximately that much value. And it's a huge responsibility in your mind to understand how do you maintain this type of relationship with the farmers, and how do you keep people solvent? How do you keep them moving forward? And what we see now is basically I got clones from somebody, or I grabbed something from somebody, and no one has any data on it, none. And so for us, you know, in order to make it work in the way I do at the tonnage level, is that we always typically release a cultivar a year after selection. And so what that does is it lets me take a look at a plant, and then I can put it into 4 major production groupings, which is indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, and light deck. And those 4 different situations have radical different impacts on the cultivar's performance, its morphological traits, its desirability to the market. And so all of this stuff takes time. So you have a situation where we're all operating using stock that we've gathered, but once you start to DNA it through the beauty of the galaxy, and I have no affiliation with the company, So it's not that I'm pushing the company, it's that I use the tool because it lets me get a really clear look at where the bottleneck is and where the diversity is. And that way we can start to say, let's diversify what we're working with genetically. And then in these things, what information do we have and how do we start to work with it? And what I've tried to do all these years, which just caused some of my friends in the past just unbelievable stress, was I was very open with this. I shared the vast majority of this information, and I shared the vast majority of these clones. We didn't hold them proprietary. We didn't put it in a situation where only special individuals got them. The lower you were ranked in the cannabis kingdom, the kinder I was to you, because fundamentally that's what makes up the cannabis kingdom. It's made up of regular, ordinary individuals who are about cannabis. And for me, that's the most important part, because that's the human connection. That's what allows us to have a different industry model. It's what allows cannabis to be unique in the way it is. It allows us to actually create a new industry based off of our relationship with the plant. You see very little relationship with plants. You see relationship with money. And I'm not anti-business at all, but that shouldn't be the driving force solely for cannabis. And so much of the stuff that we're trying to understand is how do we take the information from very intelligent scientists, researchers, nursery operators who work with regulatory process, and how do you take that information and how do you apply it to what you do? Because it's the applicability that matters. If anything you get out of talking to me, it's really about how do you get the product to the table. Everything else is conversation, but that's my main direction. And I hope today that we can get into some stuff about how do we do that. So thank you very much for letting me be here. I think that so much of it is money driven. Where if you ever take a look at products that are sold to cannabis people, it's mind-bending how much more expensive they are. I mean, when I saw this article years ago, it was about the CBD-specific bacteria. And so I said, that's fascinating. I said, and how could it possibly target CBD by itself? So I went and researched it, and I found the company that made the product, and then I found the Real Ag product, which was the same product, and it was $5 for the container, and it was $100 for cannabis-related products. And so the problem is cannabis people can't sue you, really. A lot of us are unable to come after you in court. We didn't have the ability to say, hey, listen, you sold me some product that DQ'd on my stuff. Well, you can now. And I think with the accountability, you'll have to change it. But we have to tell people all the time, any product you see that's working that well, have that stuff checked. Because there's nothing that knocks anything back organically like a chemical. It slows the process. It doesn't just wipe it out. And so anytime I see anything that's moving too well, and it's too trendy, and it's too pricey, we just wait, and then it comes up on a ban list. Because ultimately, you don't want the same cultivar in every part of the United States because it's really not meant for it. It should be for geographical zones. So this way you're optimizing the actual situation you're in. Indoor is a vacuum. You can do whatever you want no matter where you are in the world. But that's the most expensive form of production. And for a lot of individuals, outdoor is pretty accurate in terms of profitability. But it's going to be specific for your location. And so you can share the information and get the data. But ultimately, you're going to have to do another sifting process to get the cultivar to work in the dampness of coastal Washington versus the interior dry.
That makes sense.
You can reach me direct. I mean, I'm pretty easy, I'm pretty accessible. And I'm not even talking about reaching me direct to buy the product. I'm just saying I'm pretty accessible to talk about the products. You have to share the information, or otherwise we're going to collapse as a culture. I love cannabis so much because it's all these small individuals that made it up. And I'm not against corporations, it's just how America's run, but I'm definitely against taking over an industry in the hands of few. And so for me, I try to share as much as I can and get as many products into the market as possible. I can't share genetics into other states, that's illegal. But the information is definitely available, so you can check me out. See me after the thing and I'll give you an email. And then we can chop it up about what is it that you're trying to do, what are you struggling with, and then we'll take a look at what your market is. Because the market determines where you're going to put this product. And so you can't just grow stuff that you want to grow. People get confused with that. You have to grow things that the market wants, but the market's pretty big. And you have to be able to take a look at that market, and then from there you neck down what works in your specific. And so much of it is trying to find other farmers around you that have similar geographical situations, environmental conditions, cultivation sameness. And then you'll be able to work in groups. I'm lucky in the sense that I get to provide genetics to the state of California, which is massive. And it lets me work with hundreds, thousands of people over these years about how to perform for you in those locations and what happened and was it resistant and was there problems. And then we can start to take a look and say, hey, this cultivar that was selected for this shines here but does not do well there. And it would allow you to get that information. So yeah, it's all there. And you'll build this situation with your friends too. You have to team up. You cannot be a solo producer. I love the word proprietary. It's proprietary and CEO, the two words that I just lose it over. Because I'm like, use that word in another sentence. And they can't. They just know that I have proprietary genetics. And I'm like, you got it from somebody down the street and now you're claiming it's yours. It's not. What you want to be able to do is work in conjunction, and the combined brain power of many farmers is really driven agriculture forward for millennia. And now science has taken it over, and it creates a situation where there's only certain things that can enter the market because they have engineered resistance. But we're not at that level right now. We're still at the level of you have to bring product to the table, and you have to be able to use conventional farming technology to do it. And so to me, sharing the information with your friends, making the genetics available, everyone thinks that if I give you this clone, it's going to take away my whole world too. Well, if your market is that small, my God, you're really in a bubble on itself. And so you have to be able to just see it like that. And you have to be careful with who you work with because otherwise you're not going to get the data back. But for someone who's a farmer who's trying to produce cannabis and wants to understand how to use varieties and these methods, you team up. And I'm about collaboration on that. I don't see there's any other way. Otherwise, combined, we are a massive producer. There is no brand. There's no brand in Washington or California. I had a guy that ran a $7 billion liquor operation, and he gave me the lecture on this. He was the CEO of a $7 billion liquor distributorship. And he said, Kev, he goes, none of you are brand. He said, in liquor, a brand is you can be in 44,000 stores at once, and within 24 hours, you can restock all of them. He goes, none of you guys are brands. You must work collectively to form regional brands. And then eventually over time, those things will become large powerhouse commodities. But in the interim, you must work together. And cannabis, especially where we are, like at Humboldt, my God, it was like fiefdoms, where everybody was a little mini king running their own little mini world, and nobody wanted to team up on anything. But now that the money's drained out of the system, people are a lot more willing to work together. And so I love poverty, just not for a long period of time. Poverty's good for you. It's humbling. It makes you understand to work together. And you have to be able to team up in that respect. And everyone believes that they're so smart and so big. And I meet all these guys that are giant ag farmers, and they're going to revolutionize the kingdom. And they get buried alive because cannabis is a specialty cultivar. And so they have to go through this process to learn and understand too. And so there is no giant advantage right now except in terms of scope and scale and efficiency of production. But in terms of knowledge of the cultivar, how to work with the product and understanding how to work together, we can build that. We really have this opportunity. Before you jump to the next question, you can't use terp profiles to market. You can't do that.
I really forgot your actual question.
I do so much R&D for other companies on inputs, and then I run all the tests afterwards to see these things. And so I just did a video on this because it was so fascinating that you could not tell, the human could not tell which sample came out of those two bags, but one of them was very high in alpha and beta pinene, 0 caffeine, and the other varietal was high in caffeine, no alpha and beta pinene. So therefore, one of them is right, one of them is not right. No, they're both right. What people believe is that when you add an input, you just increase the terps. It's like it's all going to move linearly. It doesn't. It's complex. And you can have bacteria that converts terpenes into other terpenes. You can have all these enzymatic conversions that make smell appear. And so when you're looking at that from that point of view, it's moot. Do people like the way it smells, ultimately? The big numbers are nice on the display board at the store, But the bottom line is trying to use terpenes to mark a varietal is exceptionally inaccurate. And we've been trying to do this for a while, like how do we fingerprint it? That's where the DNA comes in, and then it prints it. Now you're going to have morphological changes and subtle shifts in what things do, but on a gene level the same. But terps, all over the place, and you don't know the difference. That's what blew my mind, was I'm comparing these tests, and I'm comparing this R&D, and no one in my circle, we're all career guys, like we know cannabis pretty well. You could not differentiate which one was grown, but one of them very high in pinene, the other one high in camphene. You know, they don't smell the same in terms of camphene and pinenes, but exact same strain, just two different inputs. So, you know, your farm could, what you'll find is that for you, you're trying to find out what creates the most distinctive, desirable impact on the customer. And that's working with your inputs, and you're going to discover what you use on your farm drives in the direction you want, and that's what you care about. But otherwise, what the terpene signature is, oh my God, it's so variable, there's no word for it. And I think it's so complex that people are trying to dumb it down too much. It's too big.
Also, so tiny.
Do they hibernate over the winter?
I think so. I don't know the life cycle.
They do. They do apply them. They do apply them. I was asked that by a reporter, and I had them talk to the county. They use them for star thistle and invasive control. They pioneered that in Canada. And so in Humboldt County, they probably wiped out, I don't know, $1 billion worth of cannabis because they're spraying this stuff continuously. And so you can clean your crop as much as you want, but it's going to come back. And what we found was cultivar selection on things that have a higher resistance, and then you work with your beneficial insect company to work on a strategy of juvenile and adults at a predation rate that's going to outcompete it. And so I had them blow over the hill and land on a farm this year, my own farm. And we saw some pirate bugs present, so it let us know that there was some food, which means they were eating something. And so once we started to find the silicone nodules on the bottom of those leaves, we were like, here they go. And it was too late to use sulfur. Sulfur works really well for this, and it's cheap. Enzymatics are tough because they bleach the leaf a lot. So enzymes are tough, and enzymatics leave living culture on the plant, which then disqualifies you from selling the product. So depending on what point in time you're going to use some of these tools, so sulfur never in flower is going to affect the product. Enzymatics never in flower because it's going to affect the product in terms of foam. But the beneficial insects work, it's just that people don't do it at the level you need to. I'm talking, you've got to get on every one of those plants, and you need juveniles and adults so that the adults come out and go right to work, and then the juveniles colonize and work. Basically, I was running 3 times the normal level of predation that was required. But I salvaged that crop. I probably lost, you know, maybe 5 to 10% of it. My friends lost 95% of it.
What do you think about for cannabis? Do you see plants that have inherent levels of rustomite resistance that are significantly different than others?
I do, and I almost think it's due to, I want to say, tougher epidural layer. You see plants that have like a rhino skin, they seem to do better, because when I'm doing tests, and I have a tremendous number of cultivars at the test site, certain ones get infected, certain ones don't, at different levels of infestation. But the problem is that the stuff that's resistant...
You're selecting for that epidural layer.
Yeah, at least I know that what I can say is, hey, we've had very good success with this. Use this as a portion of your crop. Because you don't want to be so monoculture that way either, because now you're prone to some other pathogenic problem. So you have to kind of figure out what's your distribution based off of market velocity and survivability. And you'll be able to kind of get yourself into a situation. And then it requires a tremendous amount of preemptive work. You have to be on it before it ever happens.